Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the Online Course Creator Show. I'm so glad to have you here today. I am jumping in with a bit of an update. So today's episode, I'm sharing with you a kind of behind the scenes and hoping that some of it can actually help you keep on keeping on really in your business, because that's what it's all about. So I'm talking about the importance of staying in the game. I'm talking about becoming consistent and what that has looked like for me, and also unveiling a new look that you might see if you follow me on social media and obviously with this podcast as well. So I want to first talk about the importance of staying in the game and why this matters a lot, no matter what the project is. So it might be a podcast like this example, right? But it could also be creating and selling an online course, which, as you know, I talk a lot about on this show. Or it could be something else related to business, or even a project in your personal life unrelated to business. So I feel like this year I have fully realized the importance of continuing on and showing up even when it feels like things aren't working. In fact, I think this is even more important than keeping going and showing up when things are working. And it's definitely a lot harder, right? And I think a really good example of this is my experience, my journey, if you will, with this podcast. So I started this podcast in February 2022. So about a year and a half ago, slightly longer than that. Before we know it, let's face it, it's going to be February. So then it will be 2 years. And in a coaching group I was in this morning as a client, actually the coach that leads the space was asking me, how long have you been doing this podcast for? And I said almost 2 years. And I was talking about the momentum it's gained and how actually that momentum has been gained this year versus last year, and the impact that it's now having on my business, when for a very, very long time, well, it felt like a long time, it didn't actually work from a business perspective, but I kept going anyway. And then now I'm reaping the rewards, right? And none of that would have happened if I had decided to say, podcasting doesn't work, or it's not working for my business, it's not worth the time. I hear that one all the time. And, I've said that too. It's not worth the time to create the episodes. I'm not getting payback or instant return on investment. Therefore, I'm going to stop doing it. Now, this is kind of what I mean about how it's so powerful to keep showing up even when something's not working. But the key is to actually look at the whole situation. Why isn't it working? What's the barrier, I guess? What is the issue? What is the problem? And then actually fix the problem rather than quitting. Now, that's not to say that you should never quit. I don't think there's anything wrong with quitting in the right place, right time, right situation. But I think especially in the online business world is that we quit way too easy. I cannot name how many times I have heard people say, I tried that and it didn't work. And then, you dig a little bit deeper. And a great example of that is Facebook ads, for example. So Facebook ads is something I have a lot of experience in. I've helped a lot of people with Facebook ads. I used to do done for you Facebook ad services. And I also have coached a number of people. And that is actually something that we work on quite a lot with my private clients, is Facebook ads to sell courses, right? And something I hear a lot when it comes to Facebook ads, just as an example, is Facebook ads don't work for me. I tried them. Usually that period of time is like a week or maybe even a month. Facebook ads don't work. I'm out. And they go back and try and figure out something else, even if the alternative doesn't work for them either. So I feel like sometimes we want results so quickly that we're just willing to kind of back out of something. We give it a go, we give it a try, and then it doesn't work straight away. It doesn't give us the results we're after. So we quit and we say that doesn't work. Instead, what I'm saying is that the better option is to say, I'm trying this thing. For some reason, it's not working. Let's take a look at why it's not working and how we can actually improve it so that the work that we've done today not going to waste, and we can actually start to see the results that we would like to see. And when it comes to this podcast, I mean, I'm sure, like my listener numbers last year, I launched and had a fairly good launch, right? And then it came into doing this consistently all the time, like weekly episodes. That was always my goal. And I was kind of consistent at times with that last year, but not always. And that was fine because it felt like a bit of an adventure, right? But it got to a point this year where I was like, I'm no longer willing to kind of muck around with something that isn't really working for my business. Like, let's be real. And, you know, the listener numbers are quite low. I don't feel really like I'm making an impact. I'm not hearing from people much about the show. Like, I'm not hearing feedback and that kind of thing. So I had a few conversations online with various people, and actually someone on LinkedIn. I don't really spend much time on LinkedIn, but I was on there having a chat. I think I made a post and someone was commenting on it, and they said to me, I changed the name of my podcast and now it's worth it, whereas before it wasn't. And I started to think, like, and I don't know how long you've been listening, right? As you're listening to this, I've got no idea how long you've been listening for. So to give you a little bit of a backstory, the podcast was called The Lou Blakely Show from February 2022 up until, I think, end of April this year. So that's over a year. It was called The Lou Blakely Show. And I've talked about many times on this podcast. If you go back to the later episodes, particularly episode 1 would be a really good episode to listen to if you're interested in a little bit of the backstory, why I called it that and all of that stuff. So I really didn't know what else to call it. So I just called it that in a way to get started, right? And then that was all well and good. But then when that person said that in that thread on LinkedIn, and me coming from an SEO background, my first online course was teaching SEO. I was like, that's so true. Like, nobody knows who I am. Nobody is going to be searching for me. Maybe a very small number of people, but that's it, right? I have to change the name of my podcast to something that is something that people are already looking for. So I decided to change the name, which felt like a huge risk, but it was also like, at this point, it is either keep going with lackluster results or really stop doing it. And I think that motivation would have kind of fizzled out before long, right? So I changed the name. It felt like a massive risk to the Online Course Creator Show. I actually did keyword research and looked at what was being searched a lot monthly, and that gave me the answer. That actually gave me the name for this show. So then I changed the name, and within that first episode, I saw an uptick in numbers. And then, so that was at the end of April. I have had the podcast grow since then consistently. Initially, it was a 4x growth, like that next month. Now it's like about 10 times. So my numbers have shot up so much. Like, I actually feel like I should share the graph on social media to demonstrate to you how much the change of the name has impacted the number of people listening. But not only that, now every single lead that I'm getting into my business actually mentions the podcast. I'm getting DMs on Instagram saying, I found you via your podcast, and I was just wondering about this. So I'm actually getting people now contacting me and mentioning the podcast in the introduction to me, which is amazing. Like, that's exactly what I want to see. Especially, something like podcasting, it takes a lot of time and energy, right? So I really wanted to use this as an example of what is so important of staying in the game. And if you are in the phase of creating an online course, or maybe you've already done the creation and you're currently launching it, you've done 1, 2, 3 or 4 launches, and maybe some of those numbers feel a little bit low to you. Like, that's completely normal. And we all have expectations, and, these expectations may come from anywhere, and, who knows if they're really that accurate or not. So I really want to share with you that how you show up when things aren't working and your ability to not quit but look at where the problems are and continually improve and maybe make a big pivot like I did, like I think changing the name of a podcast. There's no going back from that, right? It felt a little bit risky. So it is so, so important to stay in the game. If you are launching and your numbers are low, you do not need to walk away from it and say, I tried the online course thing, I tried launching and it didn't work for me. Instead, let's look at why this is happening. Is it your messaging? Do you simply not have an audience yet? Do people not really have a problem related to what you're offering? There's no transformation, there's no problem that you solve. Maybe people don't have a problem big enough that they're actually willing to pay for it. These are all things that you need to look at. But you shouldn't quit, right? Sometimes you need to make a pivot. Sometimes you need to maybe redo your offer, create a new offer, even if you use a lot of the same content that you've already got, but you're just positioning it in a much more attractive and appealing way. What are the changes that you can make to actually make all of that work that you've done so far worth it? Because sometimes it is just a little change. When I think about my podcast name, I don't spend any more time or energy on my podcast than I used to, but I'm getting 10x the results. That's amazing. And if I had quit and gone, podcasting is too hard or it takes up too much of my time, I don't see enough ROI and it's not working, it doesn't work for business, which we know that's not true because I know so many people who have businesses where podcasting has been extremely effective for them. So how can we choose that mindset of actually looking at what we're learning, looking at where the barriers are, finding the problems and actually fixing the problems rather than just quitting and saying that didn't work for me? Hopefully that's a little bit of motivation to you to keep going. And I don't mean keep going blindly in the same direction, doing exactly the same thing over and over again. I mean keep going as in look at where you're at, what's actually happening, and make the changes necessary. Take the lessons, take the learnings, and turn it into a positive change. And over time, you're going to get an impact that's way, way higher for the same amount of work, and that is amazing. I do think that one thing that really kept me going is, and I've spoken about this before on the podcast, about how I have a friend who I met in a mastermind a few years ago. She is a podcast VA, and she said to me, realistically, Louise, you're looking at about 6 months to a year to start see any kind of return. Just do not expect any kind of return before that when it comes to podcasting. And I'm actually glad that I heard that. I'm glad she gave me that advice because I actually think that is a big reason why I did know that it was more about a long-term result rather than a short-term gain when it came to podcasting. And I think when, we log onto Instagram, we have all these people telling us that we can make all of this money. We just need to do affiliate marketing or resell a course or something like that, and you're going to make 40 grand in your first month. And we're sold the story that it's so quick and so easy. But, if you're listening to this podcast and you are in the game of online business, you know that's not reality. And it does take consistency and hard work and showing up. Now, it's not about being realistic. I kind of despise that word because I feel like there is so much potential with whatever path you choose. But if you're not willing to do the work and keep showing up in those moments when it feels like it's not working, then quite frankly, you are not going to get to the gold that comes when you stay focused on where you're going and you do the work even when you don't feel like it. Like, that's where the real gold is, and that is the type of success that is long lasting and will create a big change in your business. So hopefully that is some motivation for you. I definitely benefited from hearing that advice when it came to my podcast, and as your online course coach, hopefully that benefits you. Like, the success of your online course is not down to your first launch. It's about how you keep showing up over time. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about today is becoming consistent. And you may be wondering what I mean by becoming consistent. So we all know that consistency works. There is no doubt that the more you show up, the more that you do whatever action it is over and over again, that it's going to benefit you, right? But I feel like there's this real resistance to consistency, and actually there is a lot of people who believe that they are not able to be consistent. And I guess what I wanted to speak about was the fact that I can put myself in that boat. I know what it's like to feel like you're not a consistent person. If you know my story, you'll know that I burnt out quite badly from in around about 2018. That's when it started, and it kind of went up and down for a while, and then I just really needed to take a big step back and completely go into rest phase. I share more about that in episode 1. Yeah, one of the things that I had to do, and really one of the big reasons that I was able to recover from burnout, is the simple fact that I was able to completely rest. My business went right down my priority list. I moved countries at the same time. I had a lot going on. My business was really my 4th or 5th priority in my life. So I had a lot of other things ahead of it. Luckily, I had different revenue streams at the time, thank God, which allowed me to rest. But a big part of that rest was that I wasn't being consistent. I completely stopped showing up for quite a long time. And while I don't regret that, it would have been nice to be able to still have been consistent, because it's taken a lot to kind of rebuild from that. But I think part of that, of like choosing to rest over my consistency, is that I actually started to believe that I couldn't be consistent. And I really started to buy into this narrative that you don't need to be consistent. And it was all about flow and, turning out when it's in alignment and all of that kind of stuff. And while I think there is definitely some aspect of truth to that, it's also very damaging to us when we're looking for results in a particular area, because consistency builds trust. And if you're not consistency, there's a real lack of trust around it. I definitely know of some creators who are huge, who are not that consistent, who will just show up and do a big burst and then disappear for a while. And while I think that for some people that can work, particularly manifestors, if you're into human design, it's definitely not the case for most human beings. Like, those people are really open about it and that's how they roll, and that is great. But I feel like just completely rejecting consistency does really do us no favors. And let's face it, most of us aren't manifestors. Okay, so I really bought into that. And as I said, like, I feel like there's some value to that argument, but I feel like also, from my point of view, it actually did nothing but hurt my business. And now I am rebuilding consistency. And that is actually part of that really comes from this podcast as well, and the kind of change of results I've had from this podcast. So yes, I did change the name, but I also got a lot more consistent. I really stepped into batching my podcasts more. And one thing that really helped with that was visualizing what it would feel like to have a whole month or 2 months batched out in advance. And I actually would like close my eyes and look at my podcast host in my mind, like visually. I'm a very, very visual person, and imagine having like 4 to 8 podcast episodes backed up in there. And that is actually a tool, a very powerful tool that I have used to actually motivate me to batch, which has then helped me be a lot more consistent. So yes, I changed the name. I think that's by and large the thing that changed the results, but I've also become a lot more consistent. I think that's played into things as well. So I just wanted to share with you that it is absolutely possible to become consistent if you believe that right now you have that identity of I'm not consistent or I can't be consistent. Being consistent is too hard. This is motivation that you absolutely can change that story, because that's all it is, right? And knowing what I know now, I could have gone through that burnout phase. And while it was great to rest, like, don't get me wrong, it was great to rest, but I actually could have chosen to be consistent, more consistent in maybe one area, like be it social media, or it could have been like I could have started the podcast earlier. So it really doesn't take that much effort to be consistent when you are able to create a system around something where you're able to batch and that kind of thing. And for me, that visualization of what it's going to feel like or look like when that work has been done has been a massive driver for me. And funnily enough, I'm actually seeing a hypnotherapist at the moment, and he was saying, we were talking about motivation, and he said to me, I actually think that the way humans or society looks at motivation is flawed, and motivation isn't about I don't feel like it today, I just can't get motivated, I'm low energy, that kind of thing. He said it's about looking at the end result and knowing that this is what it feels like. And that is the inherent motivation to actually get into action. And then I said to him, well, that's so interesting that you say that, because that is a technique that I have used with my podcast to be consistent, when really I had that whole identity that had become very strong during that period of burnout recovery, that I'm not a consistent person and that I'm unable to show up consistently. And we kind of had a bit of a laugh about it, because I was like, that's 100% been so effective for me. So maybe that's something that will help you, is that energetic feeling of what does it feel like to have this done and out there. And visually actually closing your eyes and imagining whatever that looks like. It could be that you're planning out a whole month of social media posts and you can imagine what that looks like to have all of that content out on your Instagram feed. Or for me, one thing that I really like is the whole thought that it's done and it's scheduled and it's ready to go out. So I like that feeling, or that knowledge that I've got all the content ready to go. So it could be the end result for you, or it could be knowing that it's all in place and that you've done the work and now it's time to sit back and reap the rewards of that. So there are my tips for becoming consistent, and I hope that any of those help you actually step into becoming more consistent if that's something that you are struggling with right now. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about today is I have introduced a new look, both for this podcast and for my overall brand. So wherever you're listening to this, you will notice that there is a new cover art, which means that it looks different than it used to. So I really hope you like that. And, if you're familiar with the old branding, you'll notice that it is definitely an upgrade. I love the new look for the podcast. You'll also see the new look on social media as well as I release each episode. And I also have rebranded my business. So by that I mean that I have a new logo and a new brand look, and I have a new website coming out soon. So episode 1, I actually go into all of this. Around that time that I started the podcast, I started off as the Lou Blakely Show, and around that time I actually decided to rebrand slightly from Louise Blakely to Lou Blakely for various reasons, and I share those reasons in episode 1, so definitely go and listen to that. However, at that time, it just was not a priority for me to get a new logo done and that kind of thing, and when it came time to do it, I actually wanted to do it properly. So here it is. You'll notice the branding if you follow me around the show, and I'm super excited about it and I hope you love it, and I really just wanted to mention it today so that you're not confused or, thinking that everything looks different. So we've got the new look for the podcast and also the new look for the branding overall, which you will see if you follow me on social media, and a website coming soon, a new website coming soon. I'm excited about that, and I hope you love the new look. So thanks so much for listening today. I feel like this episode has been extremely random, but it's something, I had all these thoughts coming up this morning and I was just like, I'm going to put all of this into an episode and see how it goes. The last few episodes have been very actionable, the kind of episodes that you turn out with your notebook and you take notes and you can go and action them, hypothetically, if you're going into a launch soon. However, I also love these episodes where I just get to talk about what's happening behind the scenes and share with you my biggest learnings, because they're not always related to those actionable steps. Like, there is value in both, and, especially what I shared with you earlier about the importance of staying in the game and also about becoming consistent, I think have absolutely had a massive impact on me and my business results this year. So hopefully sharing them with you has an impact, and even if I help one person, I will be happy. So thanks so much for listening to the Online Course Creator Show today. Go and have an amazing week, and hopefully you'll tune in next week too. See you then. Bye. Thanks, course creators and go-getters. You're incredible, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit subscribe in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about what I offer, head across to loublakely.com. See you next time.